Honorable members, at the break, we were debating the central bank bill. I presume we are now ready. As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for South and Central Andros.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. I'm grateful and privileged to always rise in this great house and represent the resilient people of Mangrove Key, Central, and South Andros to give my contribution to the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023, which aims to amend the previous Act of 2020. Whereas the previous act provided clearly defined objectives for the central bank, along with the necessary authority to achieve those objectives, this amendment seeks to expand the function of the central bank through its management of external reserves and maintenance of financial stability. Madam Speaker, the most significant clause in the amendments to this bill is to make provisions for the access and use of special drawing rights by the government. The international reserve asset that is called the special drawing rights, or SDR, as allocated by the International Monetary Fund, is an interest-bearing tool used to supplement other reserve assets of member countries. Madam Speaker, the Central Bank of the Bahamas plays a critical role in economic management, particularly balance and payment stability, and the preservation of the value of the Bahamian currency. Over time, monetary policy tools must be defined in keeping with changes in the domestic sector, focusing in this instance on credit controls and liquidity management. International reserves are similar to large national savings accounts in foreign currencies, managed by our central bank, that ensure that a country has the foreign currencies it needs to operate in a global market. Madam Speaker, SDRs are a reserve asset originally created to help IMF member countries face balance of payment crises. Adding SDRs to a country's international reserves makes it more resilient financially, and in time of crisis, our government can dip into its savings for priority needs. They can also use, Madam Speaker, their FCRs in a range of operations with other countries or to settle financial obligations to the fund. Since the start of the pandemic, the IMF has already mobilized $15 billion in SDRs, voluntarily pledged by some members that can be lent to some countries at zero interest rate. Madam Speaker, it is important that the Bahamian people are cognizant of the fact that an SDR allocation is cost-free. It is a unit of account and not currency in the way the average person considers. SDRs are a reserved asset, not foreign aid. They have two characteristics that make them special and extremely valuable at a time of crisis. Madam Speaker, they create no debt in the recipient's country, and they come with no conditionality. As this New Day government continues to formulate strategies and make laws and policies that strengthen our revenue collection, we recognize that the servicing of our national debt absorbs budgetary and foreign exchange resources. Madam Speaker, since this is not a favorable option for any country's strategic development plan, this Davis administration is favorably positioned to utilize the SDRs without the need to borrow at high interest rates or run current account surpluses at the detriment of economic growth. These SDRs, Madam Speaker, are not representative of any loan by the government. Once allocated, members can hold their SDRs as part of their foreign exchange reserves or use part or all of their SDR allocations. IMF members can also use SDRs in a range of other authorized operations, among themselves, like payment of obligations and in operations and transactions involving the IMF, such as the payment of interest on and repayment of loans also, Madam Speaker. According to the IMF, in its publications, press releases, and general information, I quote, "The special drawing right, or SDR allocation, is not a loan from the IMF. When the IMF allocates SDRs, participants in the SDR department receive unconditional liquidity represented by an interest-bearing reserve asset, or SDR holding," end quote. Therefore, Madam Speaker, we must be cautious in the manner by which financial information is relayed to the Bahamian public. The creation of confusion and skepticism about the government's decision to utilize the SDRs provided by the IMF is damaging in otherwise advantageous opportunities. Madam Speaker, this New Day government made it clear in its blueprint for change that national decisions would be made for the benefit of our people and all of the country. One would assume that an announcement such as this would be cause for relief in our mandate to lower the national debt to GDP while in recovery from Hurricane Dorian and the pandemic. Nevertheless, this Davis Cooper administration recognizes the urge to challenge and criticize every decision made. However, Madam Speaker, we teach our children. So let us present the facts and not assumptions or misunderstandings. Madam Speaker, the central bank has a functional role of promotion and maintenance of an adequate banking system throughout the country. In the beginning of my speech, I said the resilient people of Andros. Here is one of the reasons why. It must be noted, Madam Speaker, that for the people of Andros, this role of the central bank is substantially lacking. For context, in Mangrove Key, only 2 days out of the week are allocated for banking services. The same applies to South Andros, where twice a week, residents can access face-to-face financial services during the hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., unless residents choose to utilize a teller machine that doesn't offer full service. Central Andros, along with North Andros, have no banking facilities. There is the Loan Credit Union in Central Andros, to be fair. However, it cannot legally operate as a bank, and therefore, the people are left to find unique and creative ways to house their resources until they can travel to the capital to access a physical banking facility. One of the country's known commercial banks operates the loan teller machine in North Andros. But for the residents in Central Andros, there is uncertainty in traveling all the way up there in the north to discover that there is no money available in the machine, or, as in the case just a few days ago, the machine is inoperable. If the duty, Madam Speaker, of the Central Bank of the Bahamas is to provide conditions conducive to the orderly development of the country and the economy, it is imperative that specific plans and objectives be implemented for Andros sooner rather than later. Madam Speaker, as we present the amendments to the Central Bank Bill, and as I speak on behalf of the people in Andros, I wish to make mention for further reasons why the implementation of fully functioning banking facilities is paramount. Over the Easter weekend, there was a coconut festival down in Little Creek, South Andros. This past weekend, Madam Speaker, we had the Fish Fry Festival in Bearing Point, Central Andros. The All Andros Sailing Regatta is in its final preparation as the teams and sailors set to compete for the spaces to represent Andros in the upcoming Bahamas Games. On Mother's Day weekend, Mangrove Key will host its homecoming and regatta. And on the 2nd of June through the 4th, South Andros will host its homecoming and regatta with a special welcome concert that is free for all and features some great Bahamian artists and a special guest artist. Later on that month in June, Madam Speaker, the Crab Fest in Central Andros promises to be historic and unforgettable. These are just some of the things going on in my district that shows the economic movement is going on, where a banking facility is not a want, but a need, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we know that we are less than 12 weeks to our 50th anniversary of independence. I wish to highlight the industrious and entrepreneurial spirit of our Bahamian people by showcasing this straw portfolio made by Miss Angela Road down there in South Andros.
Very nice.
I'll make sure I tell her to leave the name on it also. Madam Speaker, this portfolio was handcrafted, a feat that many of the international and luxury designer stores and makers cannot share that same sentiment. I choose to highlight this work and mention that as a reminder that our people are gifted, and on any given day, we can show the world that our products are high caliber and high quality. I know that Harrods in London will be showcasing many of our locally designed products this summer, which is an achievement we can all share a national pride in. In closing, Madam Speaker, my wish is for the ongoing progress of our nation, our institutions, and our people. In a forward-moving society, we should push for advances in our financial systems. However, that advancement ought not to come at the expense of our smaller communities and family of violence. Madam Speaker, before I take my seat, I want to spend a special happy birthday to Mr. It Is Well, Pastor James W. Bratt, down in Congo Town, South Andros. And also to say happy birthday to my youngest daughter, Lauren, who will be celebrating her 16th birthday. And because of the great member for Angliston and Yamacraw, she'll be having a much anticipated birthday party that is really gonna be full of surprises for her. As we fully support this bill for an amendment to the Central Bank Bill, we look forward to the day when more support is given to the people of Mangrove Key, North, Central, and South Andros. We support this bill, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Asmini? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for St. Anne's. Yeah. Just waiting on this time.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity to give a contribution on behalf of the constituents of St. Anne's on the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill. The public knows what happened in December, and the public knows why we're here today. Bottom line is, we're doing something to clear their past conduct, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when you look up the word toter in the dictionary, it should say PLP. The PLPs are toters. They love a party and they feel entitled to take what is not theirs. They took the people's money to fly to Bermuda so they could party. And they took the central bank SDR money so they could party. Details on actual ownership and authority to take mean
The
nothing
chair
to them.
recognizes the honorable member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Mr. Speaker, we've allowed latitude in this debate for members, but I think the member now is going overboard. The Progressive Liberal Party, the government of the Bahamas today, does not utilize the people's money for party. Whatever work is done is on and for the Bahamian people. And what we're debating today is the central bank bill, the amendments, and all that was received from the IMF money was used for and is being used for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the benefit of the Bahamian people. So please let us not trivialize such an important debate.
Thank you, honorable member.
We stole the money.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. We stole the money.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Madam Speaker, I think the member only just trying to show a comparison in that the Central Bank Act was violated, and the member is showing that the trip to Bermuda was likewise violated. And that's all he's trying to explain.
Member is accusing the government of stealing,
No, he didn't say that.
right? So I want to make sure, Madam Speaker, that we understand what we're talking about in this debate and the misrepresentation. The government of the Bahamas utilizes the means of our country in the interest of the people of our country. And that has been explained, was explained earlier by Cat Island.
Yes.
And there's no doubt about it, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Honorable Kalani.
Very much, Madam Speaker. At no point did the member accuse the government of stealing. The member is only talking about misappropriation, not misappropriation, mismanagement, in that the monies for central bank the law was not followed. And he's also pointing out the monies of the Bermuda trip, the laws were not followed, or the policy of
Member,
procedure.
are we willing to change the word toting?
Take what in yours.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, I have 8 pages of this. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to change what I've prepared for my debate contribution today.
Okay. It'll be stricken, the word toting will be stricken from the record.
That's the easiest of the words that I have in here, Madam Speaker.
Yes, took.
No, she said the word total.
Toting.
They took the money. They took the money. Who took money? Who took money? Who?
Took the money to party. Took the money to party, is that what he said?
Took the money to party. That means
Oh, no.
took the money to party. That's what was said. Took the money to party.
That'll be stricken from the record as well.
Corporate soul.
Honorable members, let's remember at the end of the day, after this stint we call politics, people's reputation and the integrity of the offices that we hold as in this political organization, we can't call each other these kind of vile names. So let's remember, at the end of the day, when we walk on those doors, one day you're not going to be here. So we don't need the public perception to be that only thieves and bandits sit in this place. So let's be very careful of our language here. Thank you, honorable member. You may proceed.
Madam Speaker, the member for St. Anne's does not support this bill.
Thank you, honorable member.
That's all y'all can handle.
As many?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the management of the economy of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas involves a number of institutions. And those institutions, Madam Speaker, must operate in a coordinated fashion. During the budget debate, which will come up, we will be focusing on the fiscal management of the affairs of the country in terms of the revenue, in terms of the expenditure for the public good of the country. One of the institutions which is part of this governance process is the monetary institution. And that is the central bank. The central bank which is in charge of the currency of our country. It is also a regulator of financial institutions such as banks, trust companies, money transfer financial institutions. And it is very important, Madam Speaker, that when we talk about the monetary operation of our country, that we be very careful. Because it is on the monetary side that the chief financial institution of our country is the Central Bank of the Bahamas. And therefore, whether it's for partisan purpose or otherwise, we should be responsible when we make commentary about the conduct of the chief financial institution of our country, charged with the monetary policy of our country. And Madam Speaker, I begin by looking at the Central Bank Act, because it is there that this Honorable Parliament in 2020, the Central Bank Act, define what the functions of the bank shall be. To promote the stable monetary, credit, and balance of payment conditions in order to protect the exchange rate regime, facilitate orderly and balanced growth in the economy. B, to contribute to the stability of the financial system of the Bahamas through collaboration with other domestic and regulatory authorities. C, support the general economic policy of the government, providing sound economic, financial, and monetary advice. Act as the resolution authority for banks, determine and implement monetary policy, and advise the minister, in this instance, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance, on the exchange rate policy and implement the exchange rate policy determined by the minister, and hold and manage all official external reserves of the Bahamas. And it is in the context, Madam Speaker, of this statutory function that we are concerned with primarily in this debate today. And when we look at the external reserves of the country, Madam Speaker, we are talking about the good faith and credit of the Bahamas. And therefore, this isn't something that we throw pot shots at each other about. The good faith of the Bahamian dollar, the good faith that our salaries and savings and the accumulated wealth of this society is based on this good faith. And the good faith that enables one to exchange the dollar for a US dollar by way of parity, or to go into a store and purchase goods is based on this good faith. And this good faith is supported by external reserves. The reserves, Madam Speaker, could be gold, it could be US dollars, and it could be special drawing rights from an international body such as the International Monetary Fund. And therefore, this good faith is one of the crucial roles and functions of the Central Bank of the Bahamas. But the Central Bank, Madam Speaker, does not operate in isolation. Its board is appointed by or through the minister, that is by the cabinet. It has autonomy over setting of interest rates, maintaining the operation of the monetary system, but it works in harmony with the Minister of Finance, representing the fiscal side of the economy. And Madam Speaker, these two branches of economic policy are not for separate countries. They must cohere because it is this cooperation that ensures the stability, the economic stability of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And if there were to be, Madam Speaker, any what we can call a supervening events, any external shocks, then of course monetary, fiscal arms of the state must be harmonized to protect the stability of the economic life of one country, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And what we have seen, Madam Speaker, and this, every single citizen can take notice of this, and that is we had a number of shocks. One of those shocks was September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 2019. Hurricane Dorian. In those 3 days, Madam Speaker, we know how much we know how hard we have to work in order to get $1 billion into the treasury of the Bahamas. On an average year, Madam Speaker, we bring in less than $2 billion in revenue, about two point some billion dollars. But in those 3 days, Madam Speaker, the Bahamas lost $3.4 billion. $3.4 billion gone in 3 days. In other words, if that's not a shock, if that's not an external, a supervening event that would challenge any country to lose more than 1/4, almost a third of the GDP of your economy, all of the goods and services and value generated within 1 year was lost in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in 3 days. And Madam Speaker, you know, I must say, I don't envy the honorable member for Kalani as Prime Minister, because the country lost $3.4 billion in 3 days. And shortly after, the honorable member is faced not with a regional, but with a global pandemic. And of course, as the competent authority, we had the closure of the economy. The closure. Imagine, Madam Speaker, any business that has to close its operation would be filing chapter this or chapter that. In the context of the Bahamas, we'd run to the Supreme Court and ask for the appointment of a provisional liquidator to keep the creditors at bay. But what we see, Madam Speaker, almost for 2 years, the economy is shut down. And it is in this context, Madam Speaker, that the International Monetary Fund in August of 2001 decided to issue this extraordinary tranche of special drawing rights. The honorable member for Cat Island explained in very clear, simple terms what a special drawing rights is. It is an external reserve. But you know, the honorable member for Cat Island, he told this honorable house, you don't have to take our word for it, because the International Monetary Fund described it for the world, answered questions about it, stated that it would not impact the debt situation of a country. But, you know, Madam Speaker, these are not the kinds of matters, because words in this honorable parliament has legal effect. It has legal effect with our creditors. It has legal effect with the multilateral organizations which rate our country. But the International Monetary Fund stated that the reason for these special drawing rights was to enable a country, having gone through the global pandemic, but in the case of the Bahamas, having gone through a catastrophic hurricane that impacted and challenged the economic stability of the country. And this is what the International Monetary Fund, in its guidance notes, Madam Speaker, stated. It says, general macroeconomic implication and advice. Member countries can use their newly allocated SDRs, that is special drawing rights, unconditionally. In other words, the fund recognized, Madam Speaker, that these special drawing rights, they're not to be utilized like when you go to the bank to get a loan and you have to subscribe to certain conditions. You have to show that you are credit worthy. You have to show that you have the capacity to pay it back. It is stating, this is the IMF, unconditionally. A central policy question is whether the policy space provided by the allocation should be retained or used, either partially or entirely. This decision should reflect many considerations, including the economic conjuncture and the stage of the COVID-19 pandemic, the adequacy of reserves, the availability of fiscal and monetary policy space, domestic and external debt sustainability and finance stability, financing constraints, and other country-specific factors. Madam Speaker, Under this Westminster system, it is the cabinet that is charged under the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to make the policy decision for the.
The chair recognizes
What's the
the
point
honourable
of
member
order?
for Marcus.
Madam Speaker, the member is misleading the House and the public with respect to his reference to the guidance notes of the IMF. The note is quite clear, Madam Speaker, that the SDRs cannot be used unconditionally, save for the fact that it is subject to the rules of the local country. I'm not even, in fact, prior to him saying that, I've heard no one else on the other side suggest that that there aren't local conditions that are covered in the Debt Management Act, that are also covered in point number 27 of the guidance notes. It is not unconditional where you ignore what the local conditions are, and I read it into the record earlier. So what he's saying is false. It is not true that the government of the Bahamas can use the SDRs or even access them without being subject to certain laws. In fact, we are here now with this retroactive amendment because there are conditionalities that the central bank, through their lawyers, felt were not met. And those conditionalities had to be met prior to them releasing the funds. Unfortunately, the government took the funds, and I use that word. The government misappropriated the funds, Madam Speaker, and misappropriation simply means that the funds were for a particular purpose and can only be accessed through the legal means. The government is here today to try and make this legal, Madam Speaker. And so, again, that's why the amendment is here, to give the government the authority to take possession of these funds.
Madam Speaker, I simply was quoting the IMF. And this is what the IMF said. Member countries can use their newly, the executive summary of the guidance notes, and I would be happy to lay it, Madam Speaker. I'm quoting. I'm not making any argument. I'm not making any submission. General macroeconomic implication and advice. Member countries can use their newly allocated SDRs unconditionally. A central policy question is whether the policy space provided by the allocation should be restrained or used, either partially or entirely. This decision should reflect many considerations, including the economic conjecture, the stage of COVID-19 pandemic, adequacy of reserves, the availability of fiscal and monetary policy space, domestic and external debt sustainability and finance stability, financing constraints, and other country-specific factors. And it goes on, Madam Speaker. In the circumstances prevailing at the time of the 2021 general allocation of the SDRs, given the exceptional nature of the COVID-19 shock, countries that need to prioritize the response to the crisis should act flexibly and swiftly, including by potentially using the policy space provided by the FDR allocation to fight the pandemic for countries exiting the emergency phase of COVID-19 pandemic. The policy advice should shift to supporting a resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and green recovery. Staff should advise member authorities to use SDRs consistent with the macroeconomic sustainability and in a transparent manner. and to not delay needed macroeconomic adjustments, reforms, and debt restructuring, nor prolong unsustainable macroeconomic policies. Madam Speaker, this, what I quoted, and I will be happy to lay it, and when after my brief contribution, is really laying out from the perspective. Madam Speaker, what's the point of order? What's the point of order? You have to tell the Speaker. What's the point?
Chair recognizes the honourable member from
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm referring to the same guidance notes, Madam Speaker, International Monetary Fund, reading section 27. A member's decision on the on-lending arrangement should be informed by financial autonomy considerations for the central bank. These include, 1, whether the on-lending balances fall into the statutory limits or prohibitions on credit to the government. Secondly, the accounting consequences that follow from the terms and conditions of such on-lending based on the central bank's financial reporting framework, such as international financial reporting standards. The terms and conditions should normally be documented in an underlying framework agreement, and the accounting consequences, including valuation of the underlying claim in the government, discussed with the central bank auditors to determine the impact on the central bank's financial position. Madam Speaker, the member stated earlier in his contribution that there is no net adverse impact. The point number 27, point number 27.
What the member stated is so inaccurate. If you want to quote me, take notes. But I certainly don't misquote me.
You're through. I just like to complete that.
I said, don't misquote me. Madam Speaker, this honourable member should withdraw what he attributed to me.
The clear statement you made is that the impact that the SDRs will not adversely impact.
Madam Speaker, I never made any assertion.
No.
I never made any assertion. And if this honourable member cannot recall what I said, do not quote me, because you are inaccurate.
I see.
You see, I want you to withdraw it.
No, I do not withdraw it.
Madam Speaker, I move that this be stricken from the record.
Madam Speaker, to go on, in the footnote 22, footnote 22 on page 15 of the guidance note that he is selectively looking at. The footnote says,
Honourable member,
for the purposes of this note.
honourable member,
Yeah.
you indicated that the member was misleading. He has indicated that he is not, and it's been stricken. What other point of order that we on?
No, the point of order that we are on, Madam Speaker, is the member is asserting that there are no conditions. In other words, you can use the SDR unconditionally. Unconditionally. That's the term that was used. That SDRs can be used unconditionally. And I'm saying that is not true.
Honourable member.
Create a fiction and argue against the fiction. I simply was reading from the executive summary of the Monetary Fund. I have not even gotten to my conclusion, to my analysis.
Madam Speaker, the reality is the SDRs have an international definition and how they are used. But what the guidance notes also say, Madam Speaker, is despite those international definitions, the use of the SDRs are subject to the laws of individual countries where they are applied. And what I'm saying is the member is reading accurately when he says what an SDR is internationally. What he is not doing is when you apply it to the local condition, he is not going further to point out that it's subject to the laws of the Bahamas. And the laws of the Bahamas does not permit unconditional use because there's a criteria that determines how you can access SDRs and use it. That is the point that I'm making. That is the point.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, you may continue.
Yeah, I want to make it again, and every time he says nonsense, I'll
Yeah.
stand up again and
Check who? Can't check nobody.
Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker,
I will do so.
Madam Speaker, yeah, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, the function of the SDR as an international reserve, external reserve, is to ensure stability and is to respond, to enable the fiscal and monetary authorities of the country to respond, Madam Speaker, to external shocks and thereby maintain stability. And they use the word, Madam Speaker, of pursuing resilient, sustainable, and green development strategy. That is really the intention. Madam Speaker, when we go through the Central Bank Act, we see that SDR is not something which is recently introduced. From 2020, provision is made, and it is defined as one of those reserve assets under the Central Bank Act. And we see that in Section 17, which is really the subject of this amendment. And we see in that section, subsection 2F, it says claims on international financial organizations, including special drawing rights held with the International Monetary Fund and the reserve position of the Bahamas in the fund. So the special drawing rights, Madam Speaker, has always been, well, has been certainly under our law. And here we're talking about the Central Bank Act. One of those external reserves, it's in the basket. And the special drawing rights itself contains another basket, and that is various currencies. It gives the government access, whether we're talking about dollars, pounds sterling, Japanese currency, or China, or other currencies, the euro, and so on. So what we have, Madam Speaker, within the context of our law is this reserve designed for the government to access, yes, under the specified statutory provisions. And what we see here, and this bill, Madam Speaker, it begins with a very clear intention, that is to avoid any ambiguity. It says, for the avoidance of doubt. In other words, so that there could be no mischief making, so that there could be clarity in the exercise of the sovereign right of the Bahamian people to access this particular external reserve asset to ensure stability, financial stability. And this is what the amendment says, for the avoidance of doubt, notwithstanding any other provision of this act or any other written law, and subject to subsection 2, the minister shall be entitled to access, utilize, or convert special drawing rights allocated by the International Monetary Fund and apply the proceeds to reduce foreign currency debt obligations and to manage the government's foreign currency debt operations. And here, Madam Speaker, we see for clarity under subsection 3, it says section 21 shall not apply. In other words, what does section 21, what does it do? It says here, Madam Speaker, subject to the provisions of this section, the bank shall not make direct or indirect advances to the government or any public corporation. Subsection 1 does not apply to intraday credits. So what we see is that it is not an advance. It is for the specific purpose of facilitating the government to ensure the stability of the country in order to achieve the national objective or development goals of the country in the aftermath or during a global shock. And at the outset, I described that the conditions of challenge existed objectively, that is Dorian and the pandemic. And what we see is that the very purpose for which the International Monetary Fund in 2021 allocated and increased globally the special drawing rights allocation, we see existing in the Bahamas and the government availing itself of this provision in order to help with the stabilization of the economy. There's also, Madam Speaker, we see that the government, through this amendment, is also reducing its capacity to borrow from the central bank. So if we are talking about access to special drawing rights, we also have to look at the prudence that is being exercised. That is reducing the degree of borrowing from 30% to 15.5%. Here, Madam Speaker, again, demonstrating to the Bahamian public first and foremost, and also to the international rating agencies, to the international organization of which the Bahamas is a member, that there will be prudence in exercising any borrowing from the central bank by limiting the threshold from 30 to 15%. So, Madam Speaker, as part of the function of this Parliament to ensure that there is no ambiguity, that there is no uncertainty in the law, we see this amendment is intended to make it pellucidly clear the terms and conditions under which, first of all, the function of the special drawing rights and the statutory guidelines to access it, and also to limit the capacity of the government to borrow from the central bank. And on the basis of prudent management of the economy and ensuring certainty, clarity in the operation of the fiscal, monetary affairs of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Madam Speaker, Fort Charlotte supports and recommends to all honorable members support of this bill and to amend the Central Bank Act 2020 in the 3 sections which have been outlined. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Asmini? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Finance has many ramifications. Madam Speaker, before I start, as you know, I am also from Andres, and I've gotten a note from members there that the only ATM machine in North Andres has not been functioning for at least 1 month. And it's run by Scotiabank, and I ask that the government assist or do whatever is necessary, because that service from Fresh Creek all the way north. It's a serious matter. Madam Speaker, it is my pleasure again to rise on behalf of the wonderful people of the great constituency of Kalani. They strengthen me day after day to keep working hard on behalf of the Bahamian people. We are today debating the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023. And we were supposed to debate this bill a few weeks ago, but at the last minute, it was pulled. And this New Day administration is a disorganized government. This is, you're starting already.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for West
Kalani,
Rambam and Bimini.
the member for Kalani should, if he speaks with the leaders of his caucus, would appreciate that we explain what had happened and the request that was made by the Central Bank of the Bahamas, which delayed our debating this bill. Madam Speaker. Yes, it is.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Government business never communicated that Central Bank asked that to be pulled back. He and I communicate on a regular basis by WhatsApp. I'm the leader of opposition business, Madam Speaker. What he said today is not correct, Madam Speaker.
Speaker, I came to the side opposite and asked and told them when we were debating and why we were not going to pursue this bill at the particular time they were there, Madam Speaker. Now, I'm not going to say it if it didn't happen, and I'm surprised that the member might not have memory. But the truth is, it was said. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, Madam Speaker, at the end of the day, Madam Speaker.
Honorable member. Honorable member.
Comment from the record, Madam Speaker. Implying that a member of the opposition for government business does not have a good memory. You're standing up here now grandstanding. I've been humble. I've withdrawn my statement that I was going to contribute to this House today. But I asked, Madam Speaker, that you advise the member for West End and Grand Bahama and Bimini to withdraw his insulting remarks about this member.
Madam Speaker, I don't want to be disrespectful to any member, particularly members of the side opposite, particularly the member who I work with on a regular basis. But there are times when we do not remember, and I'm not suggesting that it's a commonality, but what I'm suggesting is that the member was told, and I briefed members because we were supposed to have a bill debated, and each time that happens, I seek to ensure the members of the reason. So if he does not recall, I accept that. But the truth is it was communicated. But nevertheless, the truth is, yes, you're correct. You're correct. See, you remember, you're correct.
Thank you, honorable member.
It's
So we
unfortunate.
replace that with recall, okay? Just didn't recall.
It's unfortunate the bill was delayed twice, and I stand very strongly in support of my business leader for the opposition. He has a very, very good memory. Madam Speaker, this is a government of mass confusion, and I will stick with him. That is becoming more and more unstable by the day. And this confusion and instability are presided over by a prime minister who couldn't even get the deficit straight. Another veteran minister publicly rebuked the decision of the government, and nothing happened. All of this weakens the prime minister's dwindling authority. The deputy prime minister is the one announcing projects all over the country. And I asked the question, should the PM be concerned The Prime Minister and his tourism minister seems to be at odds. And a story in the Nassau Guardian, Madam Speaker, I have support documents to support whatever I say, and I will table it then. A story in Nassau Guardian a few weeks ago reported, quote, in a statement on Sunday night, Davis said the RCI deal remains under review pending the outcome of the environmental impact assessment. The Prime Minister referred to the project as a draft deal. However, when the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Tourism, Investments and Aviation announced the deal on March the 7th, he said the government approved the project. He added that final approval is subject to an environmental impact and an environmental management study. The next day, Davis said he expected ground to be broken on the project almost immediately.
First and foremost, I don't see the relevance, and the member has not assured us of the relevance of what he is debating. But could this member be talking Oban? Could he really be talking about confusion about the Oban deal? He, as former prime minister, he wishes to talk about something. Why don't you discuss Oban and tell us whatever happened and tell us what the documents are to this point? We ain't find the documents yet. But you signed those documents that weren't, and nobody knows who the people are. But you signed it. And you have the nerve to talk about us continuing discussion with investors? Please tell us about the Oban deal if you wish to talk about confusion.
The day after the Minister of Education reiterated her position, the Deputy Prime Minister said, "My only comment is that the Cabinet approved the RCI project." Yet, the Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture on the 22nd of March stated, Cabinet has not approved RCI project. The Cabinet, Madam Speaker, is in utter disarray and confusion. So within a matter of weeks, the Minister of Finance didn't know the deficit numbers and blamed his mistake on someone else. 2 bills were pulled at the last minute. There's open dissension on a cabinet matter, and now there's confusion about the state of a proposed investment. Madam Speaker, just imagine, if there is confusion or indecisiveness about a project on a small key, 3 different ministers having different opinions, can you imagine the type of confusion that this government would undergo when dealing with an entire nation as opposed to a key? Madam Speaker, at the heart of disarray, confusion, weekly mistakes, and mass disorganization is a Prime Minister who seems himself out of his depth. However, the PLP is good at one thing, getting PLP straight. Madam Speaker, we are here today to deal with another self-inflicted wound. Now that explains it to you. Another self-inflicted wound and major mistake the PLP presided over by the disorganized Minister of Finance. Opposition statements by my colleagues, the leader of the opposition and the member for East Grand Bahama, outlined how the PLP made use of $232 million in IMF special drawing rights held by the central bank. The opposition pointed out that the administration's behavior was not supported by law. That is why we are here today, Madam Speaker, to pass this bill, to make it retroactive. This type of behavior by the New Day administration no longer surprises most Bahamians. The Central Bank Amendment Bill seeks to make provision for the insertion immediately after Section 17 of a new Section 17A to empower the minister to access, utilize, or convert special drawing rights allocated by the IMF for the purpose of reducing its foreign currency debt obligations and to manage its foreign currency debt operation. When made law, Section 2 of this amendment takes effect from December the 1st, 2022, retroactive. It is the responsibility of the Minister of Finance to ensure that proper rules and procedures are followed when it comes to oversight of the people's money. If the rules were not followed, if they were not followed properly, and now the administration has to pass a law to justify its behavior, the Minister of Finance bears the blame for what occurred. Yet again, we have an example of the Minister of Finance's inability to handle the job of finance. It was he himself, the Prime Minister, who sat in here and said the Ministry of Finance is a big ministry. It is a difficult job. You cannot just take the advice of certain senior officials. The Minister of Finance has to read the files and documents clearly. His failure to understand the BPL brief led to higher electricity costs for Bahamian families and businesses. He has to know the numbers and understand what they mean. When the Minister of Finance signs documents, does he know what he is signing? Does he understand the information before him? He has already had to apologize for presenting inaccurate information in the mid-year budget and then blamed others for his big mistake. Now we are passing a law to justify what this administration has already done. The Prime Minister does not have the capacity, it would appear, to manage such big ministry. And as long as he stays in this position, there will be more errors and embarrassment for this New Day administration. Is the Minister of Finance or the Prime Minister afraid of making the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Works, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Social Service, or even the member for Bain and Grantstown, making them Minister of Finance? Any of those four has the capacity, or those five, has the capacity to manage it. Madam Speaker, following the rules is important. From this bill, I didn't recognize, I didn't say you. From this bill, I didn't say you. I don't remember you were good at math at SAC. From this bill having to be passed, it is clear that this New Day administration did not follow the rules. There's another issue of cabinet convention that was in the press recently. The issue is not about opposition having a certain so-called authority or not on this matter. The authorities in this matter are cabinet rules and conventions. The Minister of Education publicly said she does not agree with the decision made by the Prime Minister and his administration, granting approval for the Royal Caribbean deal on Paradise Island. The Minister of Education, Madam Speaker, is a nationalist to the core, and has a right to her opinion. She is a strong minister. Stick by your word. I respect that she has a different opinion. She has been consistent with what she said in the past while in opposition. It is the Prime Minister who is being blatantly inconsistent. I'm getting there. Our system of government is based on collective responsibility of the executive. When a member of the executive publicly speaks out so strongly against his or her administration policies, that member has an obligation to resign, and if not, the Prime Minister is compelled to ask that appointment to be revoked. The Prime Minister knows how our system works on this matter. He should know the rules. After all, he's been in this parliament a long time. Yet he came out defending our strong nationalistic Minister of Education's criticism of him and the decision his administration made on Paradise Island. Just like the rules were not followed when it came to the money used regarding central bank, the rules of our political system are not being followed here. The reason the Prime Minister is not acting is because he can't. He does not have the authority in his party that the past PLP leaders had. This display of weakness of authority will have implications for the functioning of this administration. If members of the governing party see that the Prime Minister does not have the capacity to discipline those on his side, everyone will start publicly voicing their opinions and disagreeing with their leaders' policies. When 3 members of my government voted against one of our budgets, I asked for their resignations because they had a fundamental disagreement with government policy. One of those gentlemen now sits in the PLP cabinet. One imagines that he now feels he has full license to disagree with certain cabinet decisions, like a certain project in Adelaide. Madam Speaker, like so many Bahamians, I am deeply concerned with the direction of this administration. As I noted at the beginning of my contribution, the PLP's parliamentary agenda is chaotic. Bills are brought for debate at the last minute. Some are pulled at the last minute. The Prime Minister's jet around conference to conference, not staying at his desk long enough. Taxes, fees, and cost of living keep rising. Crime remains out of control in New Providence. This is not what the Bahamian people expected when they elected this administration a year and a half ago. Madam Speaker, our citizens are concerned and frightened by the recent wave of gun crimes and murders in this country. Hence, will the Prime Minister and Minister of National Security inform the Bahamian people how many convicts have been issued firearms under this PLP administration? What types of firearms have these convicts been issued? And how many of these convicts who have been issued firearms have been previously convicted of crimes involving dangerous drugs or firearms? How many of these convicts who have been issued firearms have spent time in prison? And how many whistles has the Prime Minister given to our females to deter criminals? Madam Speaker, Prime Minister's statement, government should provide women with whistles to help deter crimes. How many females have gotten their whistles? Madam Speaker, I say,
Women dying,
Madam Speaker,
abused. Yeah.
if these questions are not answered in a timely manner, then I may be forced to release information in my possession. Madam Speaker, government should lead by example. And when government do not follow laws, the Bahamian populace likewise would do the same. And that contributes to the criminality that we see. Here today we are debating a bill because the government had not followed the law. And there are numerous examples, the procurement bill, road traffic, and I can go on and on. Madam Speaker, a Nassau Guardian editorial last Thursday, April 13, quoted the Minister of Tourism. Quote, "Downtown should be one of our proudest achievements. not a place we continue to make excuses for, said Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Tourism, Investments and Aviation, Chester Cooper, just over a year ago. The state of this historic thoroughfare is disgraceful and embarrassing. Downtown is, unfortunately, littered with too many derelict buildings that have become havens for vagrancy that is a constant complaint of Bahamians and our guests. I plan to work with the Ministry of Works, Police, the Office of the Attorney General, and the Office of the Prime Minister to tackle these issues head on. 1 year later, several buildings have indeed been knocked down, and there's more police presence, but the state of downtown, Madam Speaker, has grown worse, not better. I have often heard that buildings that are neither pleasing to the eye nor functioning to the city are protected as historical sites that may require laws to be amended. I am told that outdated building covenants that limit the height of structures are also impediment. I foreshadow that will require adjustment as well. But the editorial continued, last we checked, no adjustments had come. Cooper said, existing and new legislation would be used to make the necessary changes to have downtown restored, kept clean, and provide a unique experience for our visitors and Bahamians. We do not expect laws to be made overnight for a problem as long-standing as the issues occurring downtown to be solved rapidly, but a year is more than enough time to have made meaningful strides. Property owners downtown have been the beneficiaries of generous redevelopment incentives for many years. Those who had shipping interests were also the recipients of major investment by the people of the Bahamas in the Arawak Key Port. But the government continues to soft pedal on this issue, dallying and changing city ordinances and antiquities laws that would allow them to take action. Frankly, Cooper's portfolio is far too large to give downtown the focus it needs. And while the Davis administration was finding government jobs for all of its members of parliament, it should have had the foresight to have at least a parliamentary secretary with responsibility for downtown redevelopment. The property owners deserve no more soft peddling, and the government should take drastic action with regard to downtown. Madam Speaker, along with many other...
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Assume the member for Kalani is accepting that as his own, and
I said I'll table
that
it.
he will
Yes,
lay it
I
on the
am.
record. But perhaps he should go further and say that in his short 4.5 years in office, what has he done with the article that he accepts? It indicated that this has been a long-standing problem. What has he done when he had a chance to do so? Now he sits and he pontificates as if he's running for leadership of the FNM or something, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member.
Don't cause me to spill beans on you. We have a pack. Don't cause me to talk. Don't cause me to talk. We have a pack. No. Men never talk on each other. Along with many other Bahamians, I am deeply disappointed that the construction of a new central bank headquarters will no longer be built on the site of the old Victoria Hotel. The central bank has the funds to construct a new headquarters. A national competition was held for a new modern and beautiful complex that would help to rejuvenate downtown. Parliament approved the transfer of Crown land to the central bank. Why was the decision made not to go ahead with this major project? Was this a cabinet decision? The cancellation of the new headquarters at that site, Madam Speaker, is very disturbing and begs many questions that need to be answered. As we noted in office, we were giving consideration to using the old central bank complex as a potential temporary museum space for the enjoyment of Bahamians and visitors. Madam Speaker, when you talk about wastage, do you know that the central bank project had started under the Christie administration and continued under the Minnis administration? Up to $12 million have been invested in the development of this new central bank at the Victoria Court. $12 million now just disappeared. Madam Speaker, it's the people's money. If it was their personal money, it would not have happened. But the people's money, $12 million, just disappeared. And currently, the central bank is about to commence construction, and don't stop it, to commence construction on the Frank Watson Boulevard or highway, where they will place their currency operation and IT unit. Don't stop it. The PLP, it is in Kalan. No. No, it's not. The PLP has also decided you've already thrown away $12 million. Let me carry on, man. The PLP has also decided not to go ahead with the new multi-story complex at PMH, which is critical to improving health care. They promised a new hospital. Typical of the PLP, this is highly unlikely to happen. But I'm certain, and they have my support and blessing, that Grand Bahamas will commence and carry on. A new judicial complex was to be built on the site of the old main post office, which we demolished when we were in office. What has become of this? A new complex with necessary staff must be a part of a comprehensive response to crime. The new cruise port, which was approved during my administration, is set to open soon. It is the largest investment in downtown in our history. And we're doing a similar one in South Eleuthera. Don't try to claim it, nothing to do with you. Thus far, this government has done nothing materially to help revitalize Bay Street. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister and the PLP are failing to confront our national crisis. They're also failing and behind on what they promised in their blueprint for change. In its election blueprint, the PLP promised to transform the tax system to make it more equitable and progressive, and to encourage national growth and prosperity, end quote. Instead of fulfilling this, they are adding on more and more taxes. Things are becoming less equitable and more regressive. The PLP promised to, quote, revamp and streamline processes at Bahamas Investment Authority, Registrar General, Department of Inland Revenue, and other agencies to become one of the most business-friendly countries for local and foreign investors. Well, it is even more difficult getting things done through inland revenue. And the only people seeing a more business-friendly environment are foreigners. The PLP also promised a rising tide program. In their blueprint, they promised to, quote, support partnership with wealth for the collective benefit of all. They said they would, in conjunction with the residency by investment program, encourage joint ventures with Bahamians on projects for sustained economic development through Bahamas Invest. We will create the framework to expedite projects under this initiative. the country sees little evidence of a rising tide of opportunity for the vast majority of Bahamians. There is a rising tide of money, a rising tide of travel, benefits, and luxury for certain PLPs. But the rising tide most Bahamians are experiencing is a rising tide of crime, a rising tide of bills, a rising tide of illegal immigrants, a rising tide of new taxes, and a rising tide of other problems. Bahamians, Madam Speaker, are drowning under the rising tide of problems caused or made much worse by a new day PLP that is mostly concerned about the personal rising tide of wealth, while most Bahamians are suffering from the PLP neglect, waste, and indifference. Madam Speaker, I brought a gift because I want to help the Prime Minister. I brought a gift for the women in this Parliament. All the women, Madam Speaker, I'll start with you. The Prime Minister said in order to deter crime, he recommends government should provide women with whistle to blow to deter crime. Madam Speaker, I have everybody's whistle to ensure that every female adheres to what the Prime Minister wants to do. Madam Speaker, a whistle for you, a whistle for Seabreeze, a whistle for all the other members. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
That's what your man said.
As many? Yeah. Yeah.
Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Long Island.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm happy to again be able to rise in this place on behalf of the people of Long Island, people who demonstrated time and time again that we are most certainly the most industrious, hardworking, striving people in this Commonwealth. Madam Speaker, I stand with my colleagues in opposition to this amendment for reasons that have already been outlined. Madam Speaker, having said that, there are a few matters of significance concerning the central bank and banking in the Bahamas that are quite concerning. Madam Speaker, it is widely stated that the Bahamas is a nation of over-leveraged consumers. Over the years, it appears that a majority of local commercial banks have not been consumer-friendly, several of them serving as nothing more than poorly regulated outfits that financially handicap consumers and deceptively assist in pushing consumers deeper into a cycle of never-ending debt. Frankly, Madam Speaker, many consumers seeking bank loans under the current rapacious business models are promised one rate and loaded with hidden back-end fees, thank you, once a transaction has been concluded. Madam Speaker, there are many Bahamians who are carrying massive debt, with many Bahamians tinkering on the brink of bankruptcy or living paycheck to paycheck or loan to loan. Desperate, debt-ridden Bahamians are being driven further into bankruptcy by predatory banks and lending institutions that encourage cyclical, imprudent borrowing habits and grant loans with inflated interest rates and excessive bank charges to barely qualifying consumers. So imagine giving monies to high-risk borrowers and locking them into high interest, lengthy repayment terms that force them to live paycheck to paycheck. The fact that most Bahamians don't have $1,000 or even $500 in a savings account, but can have a debt margin of a few $1,000s, is reflective of some local banks' preference for abusive lending at exorbitant rates rather than encouraging Bahamians to save more. It is in part due to these rapacious practices that Bahamian borrowers are constantly broke. You always hear that reference, and fall into this never-ending cycle of routinely rewriting one loan after the other. You know what's worse, Madam Speaker, is when they get a loan, some of that loan money is taken back, like I said earlier, to pay those bank fees. Imagine that. You go for a $5,000 loan, and you get $4,500. The other $500 is paying the bank their fees. Madam Speaker, we've all heard how certain Bahamian consumers can embrace the following the Joneses syndrome and thereby become ensnared with these high-interest consumer loans from these avaricious financial institutions for trivial purchases, jewelry. I know of someone who borrowed monies just to get rims for a vehicle, trips overseas, clothes, etc. Just enough money to become trapped in an enduring quagmire of financial problems and continuous refinancing. You know, as it appears, or as it stands, Madam Speaker, there appears to be little to no effort at credit facilities to educate the consumer. And quite frankly, it is practically impossible for Bahamians who are effortlessly approved for high-interest consumer loans to be approved for loans or mortgages, to be approved for commercial loans. People talk about the difficulty with getting mortgages, the difficulty with getting loans to start businesses, or any other loan for substantial financing for their own self-empowerment. And so I noticed, and I told a friend of mine lately, I said, look, bank fees continue to expand and to spread like germs. You know, you think about credit cards. You think about how egregious and steep these rates are. A credit card might seem convenient at the moment, but the rates are simply unreasonable. You think about the unreasonable fees that are applied to checking accounts and how you see customers being gouged when these outrageous fees are also now attached to savings accounts. Or when you use the automatic banking machine or the ATM and just to withdraw your own money, paying exorbitant fees to take your own money out of the bank. You know, I remember traveling to Europe, and every time I travel to Europe and use my cards, when I come back, I would be stunned to see the exorbitant fees that are applied for these foreign debit transactions. And so, you know, when you think about these ATMs and these monthly service charges by banks, I think they're grossly overinflated. You know, I mean, if you check 5 years ago what these fees were, and you check today, these fees have doubled, and in some instances tripled. And amazingly, I don't see much effort to curb the enthusiasm of the banks in taking advantage, I believe, of customers. You look at checks. If you get a $50 check and you want to go cash that, you're probably going to pay $10 just to cash the check. And you're going to leave with $40 out of $50. So the poor, these entities are not beneficial to the poor. Why does the use of different accounts at the same bank carry separate fees? If a fee must be applied, why is there not a consistent fee across multiple accounts? How big is the difference between the rates at which local banks borrow and the rates at which they lend? Indeed, the fat spreads charged by these banks yield very high profit margins. So we need greater transparency, Madam Speaker, when it comes to commercial bank fees. Who is protecting the consumer? How many adjustable rate mortgages are being issued in the Bahamas? How many? And you know, these are those mortgages where you take on a mortgage, and in 2 to 3 years, they reset the rate. Suddenly, you find yourself paying a much higher rate than you signed up for. And so, no doubt, that too will become burdensome upon the consumer. Madam Speaker, why do mortgagors, and this would be the bank and these financial institutions, still pay, why do mortgagors, the borrowers, that is, persons who go to the bank, still pay new legal fees when transferring from one mortgage or transferring a mortgage from one institution to another, or even rewriting a mortgage right in the same bank? So you go to rewrite your mortgage just as if you're starting from scratch, even though this is a very bank that already holds your mortgage. Why are persons being forced to pay these fees? I've long held the belief that banks should be more open to modifying loan payments and restructuring mortgages to relieve borrowers, especially during a weak economy. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, I believe that the central bank should seek, particularly when necessary or in times of when we are in dire straits, to reduce interest rates across the board. You know, why are mortgage rates in the Bahamas so high? You know, you always hear stories about the average mortgage being at some 8 or 8.75% at the lower end, to as high as 11 or 12%. I believe the central bank must develop a better appetite for stepping in, slashing interest rates, if only in the short term, which would inject money into the economy, as is often done by the U.S. Federal Reserve after various crises. In times of economic downturn, the central bank should use interest rate cuts to stimulate the economy, unless, and we see this in many of the major countries. This isn't anything new. Economic theory suggests that if the central bank cut prime or interest rates, commercial banks will have to do the same. And all interest rates charged to borrowers will also be cut, thereby resulting in a cheaper cost of money, which would encourage consumers and businesses to increase spending. There must be a greater regulation and oversight of the ridiculous rates that are being charged on loans and mortgages. And on this front, I believe the central bank must exercise stronger regulation of the commercial banks. Madam Speaker, we heard talk about a credit rating system. Is that credit rating system up yet? Is that on stream? How active is the Credit Bureau, which is supposed to be tracking personal debt and impartially serving the interests of both the consumer and the bank? Madam Speaker, these days, Bahamians we know that when Bahamians go to the bank, more often than not, particularly if it's an unsecured loan, these are high interest loans. We know the ease with which one can get high interest loans. We know that these unsecured consumer loans can range from rates at 14%, imagine borrowing $5,000 at 14%, to as much as 21, 22%, which puts many Bahamians into financial bondage. Bahamians have become virtual slaves to banks. Virtual slaves to banks. I spoke about the hidden fees and how these loans are laced with these fees. And you know, when you are at a point where you want those monies or you have something to pay off or you're a little desperate, you will sign these documents, and the average person signs these documents hastily without reading the fine print. So for example, if someone takes out a $20,000 unsecured loan with a term maturation of 5 years, and I was speaking to a banker about this, that person whose salary, let's say, is being deducted will have to pay nearly 2 years' worth of interest before making a dent in the principal. So they're paying at the end of that 5 years 2 to 3 times the amount of the loan that they would have taken out. So, Madam Speaker, even with credit cards, 18 to 25%, 18 to 25% on credit cards. Ridiculous. And then we have payday lending in the Bahamas, Madam Speaker, which is also something I believe that the central bank must do a better job at monitoring and regulating. This has evolved into a lucrative industry with steep interest rates attached to loans. And this budding industry must be regulated as it is risky to customers or consumers, and keeps the underprivileged and the poor, particularly those who are financially uneducated. Another problematic facet of banking is the proclivity of certain banks to close customers' savings and checking accounts without notice. Madam Speaker, one of the things we've observed over the years, many, many years, is that banks, if a mortgagee or a mortgagor, falls behind on the mortgage, let's say in the last 2-3 years of the mortgage, you've had banks foreclose on properties and take properties from poor persons, poor Bahamians who would have paid for 27, 28, 29 years, had a bad time at some juncture. And the banks have been able to just take the home, put it on the market, get what they can get for it, and just walk away. That's wrong. That's wrong. And so, whilst Bahamian banks charge some of the most exorbitant fees in the world, we have to look at how do we properly charge them for licensing. Licensing charges for these institutions are comparatively low when contrasted with other jurisdictions. This is significantly low. These fees are significantly low when you take into account the annual record-setting profits earned by these entities. Perhaps it is time that all of the commercial banks, I see some on districts, but particularly those in the Bahamas that offer the foreign subsidiaries, that they offer Bahamians a piece of the pie through basic listings that give natives an opportunity to invest and share in the profits. Madam Speaker, with banking currently listed as the Bahamas' second largest industry, it is past due for consumer protection regulations to be strictly and constantly enforced. We need stronger legislation or stronger enforcement in order to guarantee consumer protection. Madam Speaker, as it relates to my constituency, I'm deeply concerned that Long Island, that we will become a banking desert, given the withdrawal of brick and mortar banks from the island. We see new businesses launching, and there are numerous government agencies on the island, including the newly established or the recently established Passport Office, which I think we established that in 2021, and the re-established road traffic offices, 2 offices. You know, when Scotia left, they left the ATM. Thank God for that ATM, you know. And I know that every week, I believe they send multiple flights down to put monies in the ATM and take what they have to take, but that's an untenable position to be in. In recent years, due to fears of cash shortages, we saw a run on ATM machines on the island as islanders withdrew hundreds and thousands of dollars in cash so that they could have cash on hand. Speaker, this creates an atmosphere for criminals. We have no banks in these places, these islands. It creates an atmosphere for criminals to hatch plans and commit offenses, given the possibility that islanders and business places on these islands would have a lot of cash on hand. Given the various on-island government offices and corporations that collect cash on a daily basis, I am deeply concerned about the safety and security risk being faced by my constituents and the employees of government offices and business operators. Whilst I embrace the transition to a digital platform as a supplemental means of transacting business, it will not be immediate. as there are many persons on islands like mine who are challenged with internet access and digital literacy. Poor internet connectivity in parts of Long Island would make accessing digital financial services difficult for constituents. And we also have a lot of elderly folks who are not familiar with this new banking or this digital banking platform. So what happened to the digital rollout of the Central Bank of the Bahamas' Sand Dollar? We haven't heard much about that lately. We haven't seen that come into many of these islands or impact in many of these islands that are unbanked. Speaker, for us in Long Island, the most viable banking option, quite honestly, is for the Bank of the Bahamas to be domiciled on the island. At this juncture, we are only left to rely on this publicly owned bank, which we believe should be mandated to provide a certain level of financial services to communities such as Long Island. With major resorts on my island, in my constituency, businesses, government offices and corporations, elderly folks and visitors, Long Island, given its standing as a major island, cannot continue to be unbanked. We are in desperate need of financial inclusion. The Bank of the Bahamas is currently situated in Andros, namely Camps Bay and Mangrove Key, Bimini, Eleuthera, Inagua, San Salvador, and Cat Island. Notably, Long Island's population, business engagement, and economy is bigger than some of the islands where the BOB is currently located. We continue to seek the intervention of the government and the Bank of the Bahamas in ensuring that banking is in place for Long Islanders to access their funds and to carry out basic levels of commerce with various suppliers of government services. I'm also requesting that the government upgrades the postal system in Long Island, which would also support local financial services. I believe that bank licenses, Madam Speaker, I firmly believe this here, just like I believe in the national lottery, that we should move to establishing a national lottery. But I believe that bank licenses should be issued to qualified Bahamian groups and that more credit unions and cooperatives should be licensed, regulated, and allowed to become established in the Family Islands. We have to convey a commitment to bringing about financial inclusion to all of our people, not just in New Providence, but throughout the length and breadth of this Commonwealth. Madam Speaker, certainly Long Island cannot continue to be unbanked. The business community, the elderly, tourists, and everyday Long Islanders have been affected immensely and negatively by our not having access to financial services like so many of our brothers and sisters in other parts of the Bahamas. And on that note, Madam Speaker, I rest.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Freetown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As always, when I rise in this place, I rise because God has permitted me to get up in good health and a good state of mind, and because the good people of Freetown repose confidence in me to be their representative here. Madam Speaker, before I address the bill, I'm a man of my word, and the member for Exuma and Ragged Island, I gave him my word. I gave the member for Cat Island, Rumpke and San Salvador my word. I gave the member for South and Central Eleuthera my word, and the member for South Abaco my word. Madam Speaker, it was my great pleasure to be in Georgetown, Exuma, for the National Family Island Regatta, where sailing was set as the national sport. And this is yet another occasion, Madam Speaker, where we can see the significance of the Davis Cooper administration. And I say that because for ages we had talked about sailing becoming the national sport, but the Davis Cooper administration actually made it happen. So talk is cheap, money buy land. We were talking about it, we did it.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Madam Speaker, we were in this place passing a resolution that I was under the impression clearly acknowledged the fact that we concluded that sailing was the national sport prior to this administration, that what we did in this House was pass a resolution to make a national announcement, and it was the first time a regatta was held where there was a grand unveiling, which we support. But you seem to want to double down on something that is not quite accurate.
I don't really have time for him this evening. Madam Speaker, the anyway. Well, Madam Speaker, I will, after I finish this very pleasant part of this address, I will deal with people who insist on calling people dishonest as nicely as they may wish to do so. But for now, I live up to an obligation. Madam Speaker, there was a minister's challenge in the C class, and the contenders were the Deputy Prime Minister in the C class, Bala Raj, the Minister for South Abaco, John Pinder, in the It Ain't Right, Minister Clay Sweeting in the Sassy Sue. I think we have to watch Clay, because from making farming sexy again, he now in the Sassy Sue. And myself, Madam Speaker, in the Irene Good Night. Now, let me be very clear about it, because this is the way that I am. From the people in the race, Madam Speaker, I came dead last. Not slightly last, but dead last. The only people I beat was people like Pinewood, who didn't make it in the vote. Madam Speaker, I can truly say I was told that my father was a sailor, my uncles were sailors, one of whom, Liam Bristol, was in the boat with me. And so it's a shame that that was the first time I was sailing. I can say on a serious note, Madam Speaker, that the experience was a learning experience. It was enjoyable. I will be back again, hopefully at the tiller. Although the winner of the race, the Deputy Prime Minister, says that he will be the reigning champion. He will sail again next year. He will not be sailing in the preliminaries leading up to the next race. And I must say that I must give this to him, because I promised to do it, that he is the reigning champion, so the champion awaits the heats to see who he competes against. And so I encourage all of us, sailing is our national sport, and it is, in fact, very enjoyable. I certainly enjoyed myself. The Deputy Prime Minister's crew in the Ballarat was Captain Buzzy Roll, who he says was the first mate because he was the captain. Chris Roll was in his boat, Madam Speaker. Livingston Roma was in the boat, and Harcourt Roll Jr. was in the boat. But the Deputy Prime Minister says he was the skipper, he was at the tiller, and that is quite correct. And he has bragging rights for the next 12 months. John Pinder's crew was Jeff, Dale, Andrew Wilhoit, Cameron Sweeting, Eric Patterson, and Duncan Love. Minister Sweeting's crew in the Sassy Sioux was Miko Knowles, Cohen Knowles, Vado Turnquest, and Stephen Knowles. My crew in the Irene Goodnight. My crew in the Irene Goodnight, Madam Speaker, was Captain James Wallace, my uncle Captain Liam Brister, Reverend Joseph Brown, and Michael Ramsey. Now, we were sponsored by the Islander, who provides sportswear. It's a division of Janae's Uniform Center, and that is why the Deputy Prime Minister gave us the trophy for the best dressed crew. But Captain Wallace employs me to say which is correct, that sailing requires more sponsorship. And so while I encourage my colleagues to take part in the races, I would also encourage corporate Bahamas to get behind sponsoring the national sport of the Bahamas. Now, Madam Speaker, the member for Exuma and Ragged Island and Central and South Eleuthera, we learned some lessons in the boat, eh? One of the lessons, certainly, I think they can attest that I was told in my boat, and I'm quite sure they were told in their boat, was that you do not watch the other boats in the race. And well, they told Exuma don't look back. Since I was in the back, they didn't have to tell me that. What they told me, Madam Speaker, was you don't watch the other boats in the race because you don't have the same wind as they do, because the wind is different across the bay. And so you pay attention to the wind you are riding and do not worry about what other people are doing. That is a life lesson. I was also told, and maybe it's because I needed it, they say to strike a path, you choose something on the shore that does not move, and you set your tack based on that. You don't set it on anything in the water with you, because those things move. And it's not a good thing to do. That's another life lesson. The last life lesson I wish to share today that I learned in the boat is this, that you have to simply wait on the wind. And that's it. You have to wait on the breeze, and it will come, and you ride it until it goes. Now, well, South and Central Andres, I came last because I almost put us in the water 3 times at the very beginning. See, I don't pull punches or make excuses. Those lessons, Madam Speaker, I advance and I repeat, because I don't think I have to tell him, but the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, my life lesson that I learned from him is certainly don't watch the people on the course with us, which are the fellas opposite, because they already had their win. They ride it, they lost, they are now on whatever tack they are, and so the life lesson from sailing would tell us that we should pay attention to the breeze that we are riding, and as the deputy says, don't look back, certainly not at them, because you do not know what is motivating them. And some things are particularly disturbing. Kalani, when he was here, told a poor joke about rape victims of all things. And that he has bought whistles now. When they were in power, he should have recruited policemen. He should have bought police cars. He should have bought and equipped. Go ahead now.
The chair
Madam
recognizes the
Speaker,
honorable member for Kalani.
the member for
Mayor
Freetown
for
is
St. Anne's.
the member for Freetown is referring to comments made by the member for Killarney. They did include a whistle, but there was never at any point a joke about rape, Madam Speaker, and I ask that you have the member remove that from the record or that you remove it in your position as Speaker.
The chair.
Let me
The chair
let me be
recognizes
quite full
the honorable
in what Kalani said, because it was and is distasteful.
Honorable member, I'm listening to.
Of national security, the status of a lack of protection of women in this country, the status of a lack of a shelter for women in this country, and he thinks he can just simply stand up now after talking about sailing all weekend and claim that the member for Killarney said something in a humorous way about rape. You stop talking nonsense, West End, Grand Bahama, and Bimini. Madam Speaker, I again renew my request that the member for Freetown be invited to withdraw those comments, or that you, Madam Speaker, in your position, withdraw them off the
allow me
record.
to establish what the member is saying. He was about to explain himself. So allow.
Madam Speaker, you know, I said to one of my colleagues on this side, I've really had enough of the self-righteousness of the people on the opposite side. The member for Kalani raised an article that related to rape victims and the use of whistles to deter rape. That is what he did in this place. We told him when he first said it that it wasn't in good taste. And in the end, to laughter, he talked about having a whistle for you and having a whistle for Elizabeth. It was in poor taste. It amazed me that it was said by a man who had the ability to buy police vehicles and not let us have to buy 100 of them. A man who had the ability to recruit police officers so that we're not recruiting 2 and 2.5 squads per year. That man has the gall to come in here and talk about he's going to give you a whistle. That is what he said to you. Yes, St. Anne's, it's not funny, it's not amusing, and it really ought never to have been said. But that's the sort of thing, Madam Speaker, that we let slide too often. You see, we let in this place, my senior, the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, an accomplished lawyer, so he can read the law. In this place, when we were debating the Law Reform Act, that side thought that the law reform commissioners should all be lawyers. And we had that out when I was closing the debate. But the Bible says, as a man thinks in his heart, so therefore is he. They do not believe that anybody other than lawyers can engage with the law, and that could only be because of their lack of understanding of the law, which I intend to demonstrate in this presentation. But it is distasteful to go around talking about people are dishonest, people are stealing. I don't take it lightly, and it usually is something that requires unparliamentary language. But since I'm in Parliament, Madam Speaker, I'll stay within the rules and simply say that it behooves the other side, who seems not to have a grasp of the laws that they pass, not to be able to do the thing that Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, he was very nice. You know, you could tell someone that you don't see, or you could say there are places that you can find the information. Now, I was famous for calling people Duncy, Madam Speaker. Very famous. Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador has always been more polished than me. That's why he's always led me in cases that we've done together. But his suggestion that you take the lame brain way out is what he has always put forward when we were working on cases together, which means Monroe, go and simply read, because it's called reading the law. Don't stand up and tell me what you think. Tell me what the law says. We've had a lot of what Marco City thinks the law is. And in his regard, I don't think that he would qualify for someone that this Prime Minister would appoint as a law reform commissioner, as being capable of acting in that capacity. You see, Madam Speaker, they passed the current Central Bank Act, you know. They passed the Central Bank Act. Nobody who calls me dishonest could be my friend, my brother. Nobody who calls me dishonest can ever be my friend. The Central Bank Act was passed in 2020. That's this particular Central Bank Act was passed in 2020. Yes. All of them were in the House. Marco City was in cabinet. They would have had to approve the terms of this act. But what they don't seem to grasp is that by law that they pass, the central bank has a function that they put in the act. We didn't do it. We met it there. They did it. What I want to do quite quickly, Madam Speaker, is this. The scheme of this act is very simple and straightforward. The public can read it online for free on laws, Bahamas laws online. But it starts, interestingly, Madam Speaker, in Part 5 that is entitled Gold, Foreign Exchange, External Reserve, etc. This is where Section 17 is found. And Section 17 says, in subsection 1, the bank shall manage all official reserves of external assets of the Bahamas and give priority to safety before profitability of such assets. Subsection 2, the bank may, not must, may, pursuant to subsection 1, do one of four things. And this is where they lose track. They go to the one they want. Can do one of four things. Hold, which means it don't belong to you if you hold in it. Manage, which means it don't belong to you if you manage it. Acquire, well, if you acquire it, it's yours. And sell, which you would do with your asset, any of the following assets. And one of them is, under subparagraph X, claims on international financial organizations, including special drawing rights held with the International Monetary Fund and the reserve position of the Bahamas in the International Monetary Fund. Well, then you go down, and Part 6, because this is the act they passed, says relations with financial institutions and the government. So this is how the two bodies are going to interact. When you go down, Madam Speaker, they seem caught and stuck in Section 20, and they speed right over Section 21. We heard East Grand Bahama and all them talking about 20, 21, 21, 21, we breached 21. Well, that's because in ignorance, they skip over Section 20. Section 20 says the bank to act as fiscal agent for government. The bank may act generally as fiscal agent for the government and any public corporation on such terms and conditions that may be agreed between the government and the bank, provided that the bank can act consistently with its functions under this act. So the bank is the government's agent. An agent doesn't own the property of the principal. Yes. That's just very simple. Yeah. It's not very complex. Yes. You don't have to be a king's counsel to know that. You don't even have to be a lawyer to know that. Being arrogant doesn't make it so. and being dumb is even dangerous. So at the end of the day, it's a very simple thing that the people of this country can read for themselves, because this concept of you're arrogant because you're showing them that you passed this law. We did not. You agreed in cabinet that this should be the law of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. It behooves you now to come and call a liar, which is what you did, the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador based on your ignorance of Section 20. It is not nice, it's not Christian. At the end of the day, Madam Speaker, it is there. And then, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, when somebody says something that's so amazing that they cause you to start to doubt yourself and your own intelligence, it's just so amazingly lacking substance and credibility, what they said, it caused you to start to doubt yourself. And good thing my senior Cat Island Rumkey and Salvador reminded me, I could hear him say, if we were around that desk at Davis and Co, Monroe just go read. And so I did go to read, Madam Speaker. And Marco City has been talking all around these guidance notes, and they seem to choose what suits them. And so I will let the Bahamian public know that the guidance notes are also available free online with just Googling it. He referred to his article. Under the guidance notes, under statistical and accounting considerations, because that is what we're talking about. Guidance notes 9 says, the articles of agreement do not prescribe the institutional arrangements for holding SDR by members, including specific accounting treatment for SDR allocation. Members are thus not obliged under the articles to hold SDRs under specific institutional arrangement, nor to follow a specific accounting framework or methodology, and institutional arrangements differ widely. And this is important, regardless of the domestic institutional arrangements for holding SDRs and the specific according treatment followed by members of the entity that acts as a member's fiscal agent, which the central bank does. From the perspective of the SDR department and the fund, the obligations and rights arising under the Articles of Agreement for members' participation in the SDR's department, including those related to the use of SDR allocations, are obligations and rights of the relevant member and not of the fiscal agent or other entity or member involved in managing a member's SDR position. That's just so very clear. If you would remember that you passed Section 20. You calling big man a liar when it's just a function of your ignorance? It's Section 20 is just very clear. Note 9 is just very clear. And it was so amazing to hear somebody so flippantly call a man who is well known in this country dishonest, that I couldn't stop there. I kept reading, because this is available free online as well. And it's a book, and the book is published, and you can download it. It's called User's Guide to the SDR, a manual of transactions and operations in SDRs. And it is, no, it ain't, but that means you gotta read it. And it is published by the Treasurer's Department of the IMF, International Monetary Fund. It says Washington, D.C., 1995. Now I like it because it's set out in chapters, right? And I also like it because on this issue of the central bank being a fiscal agent for the government, the Treasurer's Department of the IMF even tells you how you account for SDRs in your accounts. And on page 42, if the Bahamian people choose to go and Google this, it says, here is how the central bank is supposed to book this in their accounts. If you get if you're allocated $50 million of drawing rights, on the asset side of your balance sheet, you put the 50 million and it would be called holding of SDRs. And on the liability side, you put the same 50 million called allocation of SDRs. And so they cancel each other out because you're only an agent. So all of this, you take the money to do this, you take the money to do that, is very disingenuous. Stop thinking Bahamian people are dumb. We are not dumb. We will read, and we will not like people who call us dumb. Because the Bahamian people can also read the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023. And it takes repeating because I'm sure Cat Island said it. I know Port Charlotte said it. But, you know, this suggestion that you take the money and you do this and we don't know what you do with the money and you broke the law and now you come in to justify breaking the law. Okay. And we had some parties. Well, let me say this, Madam Speaker.
Stay focused, man.
Let me digress for one moment, Madam Speaker. Because my MP tells me all he had to talk about was party, 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 and this money. I see him at these parties, you know. That's a strange thing. I've been to a couple of receptions, and I always see him. And I see the people who we're honoring, and I see the people who we are honoring quite appreciate that this government has decided to honor them, and in that honoring process, have thrown a reception for them. Well, it appears members of the public who are honored and who come to these receptions, that the other side says we shouldn't be doing this for y'all. That appears to be what is being said. You cannot trivialize these things when, as a government, we honor people, and a part of the honoring of people is you have a small reception afterwards. It really is in poor taste to denigrate something like that you're doing for ordinary people. And you know, it's just so amazing. They say they don't know what the money could be used for. Well, let's assume that they're being honest, right? If they're being honest, their argument is that this bill is to cover up what we're doing. Well, the bill tells you what the government can access special drawing rights for. It inserts a new 17A. It doesn't amend any section. So we're not changing any provision.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Madam Speaker, myself and East Grand Bahama made it absolutely clear that the members opposite had an opportunity to do the amendment prior to beginning to draw down on the SDRs. They did not. So what we said is not merely covering up. They are going back to correct something they should have done in the beginning, because the law did not permit them to draw down on the special drawing right. That's what we said. That's what the central bank said to us in their correspondence. That's what the memorandum of understanding that's been laid here said as well. They should have done the amendment in advance, and they did not. Let me complete the point. So again, Madam Speaker, they should have moved the amendment, and we made that absolutely clear, prior to members on their feet, Madam Speaker. Right. Yeah. Again, so that's the first point, Madam Speaker. The amendment should have preceded the action they're taking. So they have come here now to tidy up what they did before. And on this business of lying, it's nonsense what he is talking, Madam Speaker. The reality is, if you move funds and you don't have the lawful authority, then we say it is a misappropriation. That's not about calling him a lie. We're simply saying you did not have the authority because the law had not yet been amended. And we stand by that.
Madam Speaker. There was a, if you look at the act, and here again, I'm trying, there appears to be no honor, no any effort to become honorable in this place by the member. No honor, and you have no effort to be, at least to become honorable. I look, all he needs to do, as I keep pointing, just read, right? And I call upon the Bahamian people just to push a button, read what the IMF says about those things, right? So Madam Speaker, so what I'm saying, Madam Speaker, what is the position? What is the position? Is that the central bank did in fact believe that the funds were owned by them as the monetary authority, right? We then pointed out to them that it was not. They then went and sought legal advice. We did not agree with their legal advice, right? And then they said, so when you look, when you read the memorandum of understanding, it will demonstrate that it was their belief, and we say no. And the law that was read by the member for Freetown sets it out. The central bank was but an agent for the fiscal authority, and there's no owner. And so for the purposes, so if all you need to do is look at what the amendment says for the avoidance of doubt. For the avoidance of doubt. And the memorandum acknowledges that, and the memorandum permitted the withdrawal of the funds. So this twisting.
And it answers the point.
Right? And answer whether it's a loan or not.
But what
We did not take any money. The central bank had the money, and they allowed us to have it. After they were satisfied, they could have done it. Yeah. And in fact, Madam Speaker, it speaks of how we allow the independence of the central bank. They took a view, we respected the view, and we said, but this is our view, and we demonstrated by looking and asking them to read by, as I said, pushing a button and showing them what the IMF said, and the IMF confirmed what we had to say. Hence, they allowed the funds to be released. That's the fact. That's the fact. It's simple, right, Madam Speaker? And there could be no issue over that.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Madam Speaker.
Chair,
Speaker, there is an issue. First of all, let me say thank you to the Prime Minister, the member for Cat Island, because he's just revealed to the entire country that we are not alone in our interpretation of the documents that we read. The central bank and their staff, Madam Speaker, the central bank and their staff, the central bank, their staff, and their external counsel, shared a similar view, Madam Speaker. And what was said by Cat Island just now, Madam Speaker, makes another point. And that is, it is not correct that they simply acquiesced then to the government. They agreed, rather, with the government's position. I mean, the fact that we have this amendment with what they recommended to the government, they said, listen, in order to do what you have in mind, it's important that we put in place a memorandum of understanding that satisfies certain conditions. That's what the central bank did. That's what the central bank did, right? So again, Madam Speaker, the same document that the Prime Minister just laid this morning, wasn't laid when he said the other week, just laid. This document is proof positive, Madam Speaker, that the central bank was concerned about the fact that way back in December 2 tranches of drawdown occurred and the SDRs were converted to US currency, Madam Speaker, before the agreement was finally executed. Madam Speaker, if that is not ultra virus of the law, I don't know what is. And I don't have to be a KC in order to know that.
Thank you. Freetown, you may continue.
Madam Speaker, you know, the Prime Minister has said twice to the leader of the opposition, read. And when we say read, we mean read everything. And it is unfortunate that he doesn't even realize who all he casts aspersions on when he does what he does. But the point that I was interrupted in making is, if they say this is ex post facto legislation, let us look what it says. They don't like the first 4 words for the avoidance of doubt, so let me put them on the side for the moment. It says, notwithstanding any other provision of this act or any other written law and subject to subsection 2, the minister shall be entitled to access, utilize, or convert special drawing rights allocated by the International Monetary Fund and apply the proceeds of such conversion. That's what the International Monetary Fund itself says. And what can it be applied to? To reduce the government's foreign currency debt obligations and to manage the government's foreign currency debt operations. That's it. Those are the 2 things. So when you talk about I appropriate, it's like you saying Monroe appropriates Sayers money and pays Sayers mortgage. People will laugh you off the block with that. I steal Sayers money and pay Sayers mortgage.
The chair recognizes the honorable member from Marco City.
So, Madam Speaker, earlier, one of the points that I made, Madam Speaker.
It's the House of Assembly, not Davison Cook.
Exactly. Madam Speaker, one of the points that I made earlier is that had the government come to the House, move the amendment in advance of taking the action, we could have raised other issues, but we certainly could not have raised that they acted ultra virus of the law, right? But let me say this: the point that was made by the member for Freetown about sourcing this money through the SDRs in order to go and do something else, that's not the central point we made. The central point we made is that you were in no position at the time that you took possession of the funds to do so. That's the point. That's the point. They were not in a position to draw down. You see it differently. We see it differently. They were not in a position to do so, and that is what was communicated to me. That is what when I wrote both the Prime Minister and the Governor of the Central Bank at the same time to get both versions of the story. And then we read, contrary to what he asserts, we read. This agreement, when I listened to the Prime Minister this morning, he gave the impression, and he restated it, supported by the member for Freetown, that the bank was merely a fiscal agent. And that this is the government's money. The government can get it anytime it so desires, etc. And that it's not going to place a liability on the government. All of that is incorrect, Madam Speaker. The government has to repay. The government has to repay the funds that it is taking possession of through the central bank to those countries that it drew the money from. This is not just free
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Freetown.
You know, Madam Speaker, there's a saying. There's a saying that unfortunately, it's unfortunate that Marco City does not realize that repetition doesn't improve an argument. As a matter of fact, they passed the Central Bank Act that created the central bank, the government's fiscal agent. We did not do that. He had a hand in doing that. He was in the cabinet. He may not like to remember it now, but that is the law that they passed. Now, the reality is this. When you use the words for the avoidance of doubt, that means I think something and you think something else. All of what is in this, the minister being entitled, I just read from Guidance Note 9. I've directed them to the book. He's jumping up and down and he even ain't read the book yet. So he's content to be ignorant and content not to seek to cure his ignorance by getting some facts. That converts ignorance to something else that is unparliamentary to say. But I've directed you to where you can get the book. Read the book. Stop just jumping up and down and telling us what you think. I think I'm the sexiest man in the world. That don't make it so. So, at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, what is very dangerous, about the conduct of the persons on the other side? And you know, it appears to be a part of their DNA. The former Prime Minister went around telling the world that everyone in the Bahamas was corrupt, not seeming to understand that it would have an adverse impact on this country. What Marco City has just done is to say that the governor of the central bank, who was first appointed in 2016, reappointed by them in 2021, and his lawyer, who happens to be junior to me, had a view that they shouldn't give the government this money. If they really believed that, they wouldn't have done it. It's as simple as that. Nobody is suggesting that the Prime Minister went with a cutlass or anything to the central bank and walked out with US currency. Nobody is asserting that. Nobody is asserting that anybody went into the Central Bank of the Bahamas and walked out with briefcases of cash. So they need to stop calling people dishonest and breaching their rules.
Point of order. So the member, Madam Speaker, raised an issue that none of us raised, this business of going into the central bank with a cutlass and coercing public servants. I find that quite interesting. What we said, in fact, Madam Speaker, is that the Prime Minister, and I want to go back to the memorandum of understanding that's been signed between the government and the central bank. The memorandum of understanding, Madam Speaker, makes it clear, and I read a cover page earlier. I went to before I get to Article 3, Madam Speaker, this talks about servicing. Let me go directly to Article 3. Point number 1 in Article 3 says that this is service and repayment by the government. I was just berated, Madam Speaker, by the all-knowing member for Freetown. But again, this is what the article says. Servicing of the obligation to the IMF that relate to the use of the 2021 SDR allocation shall be fulfilled without a financial burden to the bank. Payment of all costs and charges related to the use and reconstitution of the SDR allocation, including payment of interest charge as determined by the IMF, are the responsibility of the ministry. Madam Speaker, this is a lie. This is, first of all, and the Prime Minister unfortunately wasn't here when I mentioned earlier, this was a liability that the central bank listed in their report, Madam Speaker. It is a liability that's further shown here in the terms that the central bank insisted that must be signed off on prior to the government drawing down, getting the 2 tranches, Madam Speaker. So it is not free money as they would have the public believe. And what I find amazing is when the Prime Minister spoke on this, the Prime Minister never addressed all of the details. He just pointed to the documents. The details clearly show that the government has accepted a liability. It never forecast it was going to do so in their July report. This is something we discovered in reading the central bank report and the annexes. So when the member wants to talk about we're calling people disingenuous, all we're saying is you are obligated by law to reveal to the public when you're going to take on a liability. You did not do so. So what are we to assume? That you were, as the Prime Minister likes to set up the bookend, you were either incompetent and didn't know, or you sought to hide it. Those are the two things. You either was hiding it, or you didn't know better. But we expected the member for Cat Island would have told the country, we are about to convert $232 million of SDRs into currency to use for whatever the purposes are. We don't know. It was never revealed in the House what the purposes were. And so that's all we're saying. Yeah.
Freetown, you may continue.
I don't see how that is a point of order, since I never mentioned any of that. What Marco City seems to want to run away from is that what is clearly on the table was one lawyer took a view, wrote an opinion. As a matter of fact, he is junior. As a matter of fact, he is junior to me. That's a different story. So, one lawyer wrote an opinion who is junior to me, as happens, as sensible people do and are suggested to do. You say to the bank, that's your view. We don't agree with you. It's the government's money. Let us have it because it's our money. They let us have it. They let us have it. And they say, since we disagree with you, sign this agreement that says we don't bear any cost. Well, guess what, Madam Speaker? This is again something that is set out in the Memorandum of Understanding, in the booklets from the IMF, and in the concept of a fiscal agent. An agent doesn't bear any cost for work that he does for his principal. I really wonder if they knew what the effect of Section 20 of the Act that they passed is. Because all he read was everything that an agent says. If I'm doing something on your behalf and I incur a charge, you pay the charge. Nothing earth-shattering about that. Nothing mind-blowing about that. It is a consequence of Section 20, which stands unamended of the Central Bank Act. I really don't understand why they don't get people to explain this thing to them. Because it's very clear. If you didn't get it when you read it, they appear to have read the guidance notes. When the guidance note says that it's not the property of the fiscal agent, and you remembered that you constituted the central bank, the fiscal agent of the government. And by the way, the governor in the IMF for the Bahamas is Cat Island, Rum Cay, and San Salvador, and not the governor of the central bank. In case you needed something else to tell you that it's not the central bank's money. At the end of the day, it's an agency. They gave the money. There was a disagreement on what the law is. And when you have a disagreement on what the law is, you pass legislation for the avoidance of doubt. And what is dangerous that the side opposite keeps doing, and I'm persuaded now that they do it on purpose, is to talk down this country, to try to purposely damage this country.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Barnabas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would encourage the member to, the insults and the suggestion that this side opposite dishonest and tries to call the Commonwealth of the Bahamas into disrepute. Madam Speaker, it's just not necessary, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member.
Speaker, Madam Speaker, to be very clear, I make this point because one of my constituents who I represent, and I'm here to speak to, says to me, Monroe, if they keep talking like this, is this going to damage the reputation of Bahamas in the world? Ordinary Bahamians are beginning to notice. And so you need to stop it. Where there is an act of parliament that you pass that negatives what you say and do, then at the end of the day, we have to wonder, as my constituents are wondering, why are you all doing this? So at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, the answer to be found by the Bahamian people are to be found in the Central Bank Act 2020 that they passed, is to be found by simply, as the Honorable Prime Minister says, by Googling IMF, by Googling user guide SDF. All of this is available free of charge, and the public ought just to do something that I join the Prime Minister in inviting the side opposite to do. Find it, read it, digest it. If you don't fully understand it, consult somebody, and you can't jump up and tell me you read the book that I just directed you to, because you didn't have the time to do it. So, Madam Speaker, Freetown supports this amendment. And if the side opposite, no, this was wrapping up. If at the end of the day,
Madam Speaker,
The chair recognizes Marco City, the honorable member.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The International Monetary Fund guidance notes are right here, Madam Speaker. Guidance note for fund staff on the treatment and use of SDR allocations. The member for Freetown doesn't have a monopoly on having a desire to read, to do a good job on behalf of the Bahamian people. We may sometimes see things differently, but he doesn't have a monopoly on interest in being diligent to do his job. Madam Speaker, hopefully the final document I'd like to read is really a cover note. I didn't see it. I didn't see it. And this is to the point. This is the point raised by the member, Madam Speaker. These are the handouts. These are the handouts that the Prime Minister laid. Again,
Member, what is your point of order?
Madam Speaker, the point is simply this: the member for Freetown seeks to leave the impression in the public domain that members opposite have not taken the time to look at the documents. And I'm saying, we have all the documents here, Madam Speaker. Here's one of the documents the Prime Minister didn't get around to laying. And I looked, and Prime Minister, forgive me if it's stuck to one of these pages, right? But the cover note, your cover note, that's called issued. Wait, just one moment.
Give me a moment. The chair recognizes the honorable member for West Grand Bahama.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. There's no point of order, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, may we proceed? There's no point of order. 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 Madam Speaker, it's time now for us to move the question, Madam Speaker. I now move.
Second. I recognize West Grand Bahama after you. You said it was misleading. Misleading in which way?
I said he sought to leave on in the public domain the impression that we have not, one, looked at the guidance notes. Two, he sought to leave on the public impression that the funds, Madam Speaker, let me complete the point. That the funds that he's talking about belongs to the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We have a document right here that says differently. So, Madam Speaker, I wish to read the comments that the Prime Minister and his staff developed. This is a document that he developed. So if I'm wrong about it, the Prime Minister can clarify.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for West Grand Bahama.
For Marco City, spoke this morning. Throughout the member throughout the member for Freetown, the member for Marco City continued to rise. Madam Speaker, we've completed this debate now.
Honourable
It's
member.
time now to put the question. We've heard this, we've heard all the members talked about all day today. Now it's time to put the question, Madam Speaker, and I now put the question.
Thank you, honourable member. Thank you, honourable member. The question has been put. Honourable member, it is clear to me and the Bahamian people and this honourable assembly that you have all read the documents. You have all the documents there. You've been quoting from them all day.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister laid a folder of documents. So I would think that the cover note for the memorandum of understanding. No, I'm just saying this is what I got from the clerk.
Laid one
That's
document.
that's what I got. A folder with all the documents you laid. So I was just saying there's one that you may have missed. I want to read it into the record.
He laid one document. Yes.
But we entitled to a point of order.
We're
entitled to a point of order.
Honourable members. Honourable
I'm
members.
in your hands, Madam Speaker, but I'd like to just read the final comment and then I'll
Honourable
take my
member, would you
signal.
like to lay that document?
I'd like to read it for the public, Madam Speaker. I'll read, Madam Speaker,
Honourable
I will
member,
read a portion of the
honourable
document.
member, the honourable member for Cat Island, Ramkey and San Salvador laid one document.
No, I got a folder, Madam Speaker.
You got a folder? Where's the document that Cat Island laid? Where's the document?
Sure. All of these are documents that Oh, okay, well, I'm just saying, that's what we got from the House.
This is what the
what I
honourable
got from the
member
House.
laid, and I had it to lie on the table. This is the document. I did not get a folder of documents.
Mr. Prime, this is what, one document.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a second time and committed.
Bill for an act to amend the Central Bank.
Why is St. Barnabas being muffled in this house, please? Why is St. Barnabas being
For the second reading of bills?
Madam Speaker?
Madam Speaker, we now move that the House moves, resolves itself in the Committee of the Whole.
Committee of the Whole. Honorable members, I have said in this honorable place on many occasions that when we come here for debate, I should be presented with a listing of names of persons who will present.
Did you get one today?
You didn't provide me with one.
The clerk has the report. Did the clerk circulate?
Well, he didn't. He did not give it to me. I have often asked on many occasions I would send over to your desk. On many occasions I would send over and I would ask, who are the speakers? Today I did not get a listing of speakers. I was given a listing of speakers and I go by what is said to me or what is given to me. Nothing was said to me. Nothing was said to me. So now you're admitting that nothing was said to me, so that just backs up what I said. I did not get a listing of speakers from that side.
7 speakers in the absence of a list.
I got a list of don't try to overtalk me. I'm speaking. I heard you. And I got a listing of speakers, and the listing never got to me.
Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes
Madam
the member for West Grand Bahama.
Madam Speaker, we discussed on the break. We discussed on the break the amount of speakers that were left. St. Barnabas was never included.
You discussed it with the member
Yes,
for Sinai?
the gentleman discussed. In the gentleman discussion. St. Barnabas was never included, Madam Speaker. And we agreed, Madam Speaker, even in this chair, even in this chair. Sit down. Sit down.
There won't be two members.
You sit down, man.
Allow me to hear.
Nonsense.
Allow me to hear from the West Grand Bahama.
Just sit down. Just sit down. St. Anne's got a problem. His memory has left him today. He doesn't remember anything. He talks absolute total nonsense. Madam Speaker, we discussed and we agreed And in fact, from this place and in this chair, I said that the last speaker from the side opposite was Kalani. And then we made an adjustment to allow for Long Island. And we said that the person wrapped for us would be Freetown.
Would be Freetown.
And once Freetown takes the
Yes.
floor, Madam Speaker, as
That
the
would be the wrap-up.
concluding debater, what happens, Madam Speaker, is he uses extensive time. We've already gone past that, so therefore now we cannot go back.
Thank
That's
you,
the whole
Honourable Member.
purpose, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, Committee of the Whole. Listen, Honourable Members. Listen, don't.
All this so you would prevent one member of parliament from speaking. Yes, yes.
Honourable Member, I have never not allowed you to have a voice in this place. So don't do that. Don't do that. From my understanding, allow me to speak. Allow me to speak. From my understanding that after the last speaker would have spoken, there was an exception for Long Island. After Long Island, we would move into the wrap-up, which would have been the honourable member for Freetown. That was my understanding. I have watched y'all maneuver cross the floor, so you can't come and say to me that that was not an understanding.
Madam Speaker, you only heard from Mr. Wilscombe. You never even asked me if what he said was correct.
Mr. Nance, that is not correct.
That is not correct, Madam Speaker. We never made an exception that Long Island would be the only one. When I know my deputy leader is coming on, I know my deputy leader is expected to speak at the end of the
Standing up and telling a bold-faced lie.
I would never.
And that's what he's doing, Madam Speaker. It is not true.
Dialogue, and we said that there would be 2 more speakers, and the wrap-up bill, an exception was made for Long Island.
And you know it.
Before he arrived.
Being dishonest.
I heard it.
There would be 2 more speakers. You have Long Island, you have Cartwright. That's 2.
Man, you're being dishonest.
2. I'm not being dishonest. I am not being dishonest.
You're being dishonest.
The chair recognizes
another hour and a half for this gentleman to talk about sailing, and Barnabas can't contribute.
I speak to this point since Barnabas was here last term. Everyone sat down and watched me go beyond 30 minutes. If they really thought that somebody was coming after me, the clock would be moving.
Now, Madam Speaker,
there's a member on the floor.
And Madam Speaker, on this point of a wrap-up, as
Honourable member, there will not be 2 members on the floor. Honourable member.
Less than 5 minutes that we had another speaker, Madam Speaker.
And there's nobody in here by the name of Obi. There's an honourable member.
Work with a member who does not speak the truth. We agreed to that during the break, and we informed the chair that there would be 1 more speaker. And we had 1 more speaker, and we informed the chair when we were going to wrap, Madam Speaker, and that was the last speaker, and that's it. And so now, Madam Speaker, we must end this foolish diatribe and move on. It is now time, Madam Speaker, to move to the Committee of the Whole.
Is there a seconder? Second. It's removed and seconded that the House do now resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole with the Deputy Speaker in the chair. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. The House will now resolve itself into Committee of the Whole with the Deputy Speaker in the chair. Too many people in charge in here. That's what. The Deputy Speaker is now in the chair.
Madam Speaker, why is the House stopping St. Barnabas from speaking? Why is the House on this occasion stopping St. Barnabas from speaking? Why is some of the insults? Okay? Hey, listen, Madam Speaker, Mr. Chairman, why is it that the House is not allowing the member for St. Barnabas, the people of St. Barnabas, to be heard, Madam Speaker?
One minute.
One more speaker.
Miss.
and down all day, late all the time.
We told him it was one more, Mr. Chairman. We told him there was one more speaker.
Honorable member, honorable member,
One more speaker, Mr. Chairman.
honorable member,
One more speaker, Mr. Chairman.
we are in the committee of the whole. Okay, listen, okay, now you're being disrespectful. Now, please, have a seat. We are now in the committee of the whole. If you have something to say, you will be able to do that in member statement shortly. Thank you.
Mr. Deputy, I now move that the long title of the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023 be moved.
Second.
Be agreed.
Give me a blank piece of paper, please. That's a piece of paper. Just to write on. Oh, I have it. That's the long title. It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The long title of the bill is agreed.
Mr. Deputy, I now move that the short title of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Your motion is defeated. The motion is carried. Yeah, your. I said your motion is defeated. The short title of the bill is agreed.
Mr. Deputy, I now move that sections 1 through sections 5 be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that section 1 through 5 is agreed. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Section 1 through 5 is agreed.
Deputy, I now move that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The bill in its entirety is agreed.
Deputy, I now move that the Speaker do take the chair.
It has been moved and seconded that the Speaker do now take the chair. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. The Speaker will now take the chair.
Did you get the resolution?
Honorable members, the Deputy Speaker and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole has reported that the committee has examined the bill, having made no amendments thereto. Third reading and passing a bill.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the third reading passing of the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, honorable members. It's been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. A copy of the bill, please. A bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a third time and pass.
A bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act.
For the third reading and passing.
Go for the third reading, Madam Speaker.
Order that the clerk do take the bill passed by this House today to the Honorable Senate for their concurrence. We will now revert back to the order of business. Ordered that this bill do now pass, and the title thereof declared to be the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act 2023. For the third reading and passing of bills?
Go for the third reading, Madam Speaker.
Go ahead. Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the clerk do take the bill passed in this Honorable House today to the Senate for their concurrence. We'll now revert back to the order of business. Consideration of Senate's amendments? Resolutions?
Oh, no, sir.
Member statements? None? Appointment of select committees? Instruction of select committee? Discharge of select committees? Notices for future meetings? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Fox Hill.
Madam Speaker, myself or a member of the government will move the following resolution at the next sitting of Parliament. Whereas the Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU, is a body that seeks to promote peace and security, democracy and human rights, the rule of law, and sustainable development. And whereas the Inter-Parliamentary Union is recognized as the global organization of national parliaments, which clearly attests to the willingness of nations to build strong ties of interparliamentary dialogue and cooperation with a view to better meeting the needs and expectations of citizens for a safer and more equitable world. And whereas the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas recognizes that interparliamentary contacts and cooperation can help strengthen the institution and lead to stronger engagement at the regional and international levels. And whereas the Parliament of the Bahamas is desirous of requesting membership of the IPU, and whereas the Parliament, in making application for membership, has to decide on a number of administrative arrangements for its participation as a member, hereby proposes to constitute a committee to have responsibility for the organization of the relations and activities of the Parliament with the IPU. And whereas the Parliament may make guidelines on how it will function as an IPU member. Now, therefore, be it resolved that this House, A, approves Parliament being a member of the Interparliamentary Union, B, approves the constitution of a committee to have responsibility for organization of the relations and activities of Parliament with the Interparliamentary Union, and C, approves the making of guidelines by Parliament on how it will function as a member of the Interparliamentary Union.
Order the resolution be brought up. Thank you. Order the resolution to lie on the table. For the notices for future meeting?
Madam Speaker, I give notice that at the very next meeting of the House, we propose to move the following resolution. Whereas the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a member of the United Nations that seeks to promote uniformity in the implementation, protection, and enforcement of human rights, and whereas the United Nations has also established mechanisms to promote and protect these rights and to assist states to carrying out their responsibilities, and whereas the Parliament of the Bahamas plays a critical role in the country's compliance with its human rights obligations on the international and regional levels, and whereas Parliament is desirous of constituting a committee to comprise of 8 members of Parliament, 5 members of the Honorable House of Assembly, and 3 members of the Honorable Senate to be responsible for monitoring the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas. Now therefore be it resolved that the House approves the constitution of a committee of 8 members of Parliament to monitor the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas. Be it further resolved that the terms of reference of the committee are as follows: to assess and evaluate all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, to determine the level at which such rights are in compliance with regional and global obligations, to report to Parliament every 6 months on human rights matters, to make recommendations to guide the legislative process to improve human rights in the Bahamas, to investigate alleged human rights violations through parliamentary inquiries, holding public hearings on human rights related issues, with power to send for persons and papers, with leave to sit from place to place, and with leave to sit during the recess.
Order the document be brought up. Order the document to lie on the table. Further notices for future meetings?
This is the name of the government.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Renew all notices in the name of the opposition, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Adjournment?
Speaker, I now move that the House adjourns to Wednesday, the 26th day of April, 2023 at 10 a.m.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, Honorable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House be adjourned to Wednesday, April 20.
We asked them for the 26th. We have to go to 26th.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House be adjourned to Wednesday, April 26th at 2023 at 10 a.m. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. Final adjournment?
Madam Speaker, I now move that the House stands adjourned to Wednesday, April 26th, 2023 at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Honorable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House stand adjourned to Wednesday, April 26, 2023 at 10 a.m.
All right.